A lot of American history is lacking a lot of truth. If you leave it up to these Caucasians to tell the story, they're going to leave out so many things. And one of the biggest things they will leave out are all of the uprisings and the moments that our ancestors actually rose up and fought back. And you may ask, why don't we ever hear about this? Because they're afraid that if you find out how hard they fought back, it'll give you the idea to rise up against them. So what they've done was create this fake history of our ancestors just being afraid and shaking and just being good slaves. It did not happen, ladies and gentlemen. Not only did we fight wars on this soil with these Caucasoids during slavery, there were fights, deadly fights, on the slave ships. And many of these Caucasoids were killed on those slave ships. Not to mention, there were a few ships where the slaves were able to gain control and take the ship back to Africa. See, they're not going to tell you all of this stuff. Now, there was something that they tried to mask and disguise as the Seminole Wars. The Seminole Wars were actually the Gullah Wars. And this is where a slave rebellion that went on in the South from 1739 to 1858, I believe. I know this says 59, but I believe it was 58. And our ancestors got together, formed an army. These were a lot of runaway slaves. They formed an army, and they were kicking the ass of those Caucasoids down there in the South, killing them left and right. Okay? And you're about to hear about the Gullah Wars that really happened. And yes, it went on for over 100 years. And it just go to show you this fakery of our ancestors got put in their place by this Caucasoid all the time. It didn't happen that way. Many times there were uprisings. Many times they got killed in high numbers during this 100 years, but they won't tell you this. So let's go ahead and watch this video on the Gullah Wars.
Black history is taught like this. You started off as a slave, then white folks felt bad and decided to free you. Then civil rights legislation made you equal. And finally, you achieved victory with Obama's election. The end. Of course, that is ridiculous. That is the white supremacist version of Black history. The end result of this miseducation is that Black children are separated from their own people's legacy and historical achievements. Everybody in the world has the right to draw inspiration from their own people's legacy. And this right is robbed from Black children because their history is actively hidden, distorted, and replaced with make-believe. For this video, we will carefully cover the facts on how Black people became liberated from American chattel slavery. The miseducational system has taught us three gigantic myths about the freeing of the slaves. The first myth is that there was only some slave rebellions here and there, but not any kind of large-scale military resistance to slavery initiated and carried out by Black men. The second myth is that any slaves who wanted freedom basically fled north to be granted freedom. The third myth is that the Civil War was the primary event that ended chattel slavery. The reality is that there was a series of battles, revolts, and rebellions that lasted from 1739 to 1858. This was the Gullah Wars. That is more than 100 years of warfare totally hidden from the American history books. A lot of this history was disguised as the Seminole Wars. First of all, the Seminoles were not a real Native American tribe. They were Native Americans allied with and often led by Black Africans. Seminole literally means runaway. Maroon means fugitive. Gullah refers to the Black Africans. The Emancipation Proclamation was a staged event, and it was designed to stop and historically hide the self-liberation process of Africans in America. Africans were brought into the Anglo-American New World Order, and many of these Africans maintained the goal to kill, crush, and destroy white supremacy. 1739, the Gullah War begins. Carolina was about to pass the Security Act, which would require whites to be armed more often to prevent a slave uprising. So the slaves decided that this was the time to strike. About 20 of them went to the local store, stocked up on guns and ammo, killed the shopkeeper, and began the Stonewall Rebellion. The rebels marched, and as they marched, their following grew larger and larger. They chanted out "Liberty" as they marched, chasing the slave owners, killing them, and burning their houses down. After the rebellion, South Carolina passed the Negro Act, which prevented a future rebellion by limiting the rights of the slaves. From that point in time until 1812, the Gullah were fighting continuous battles against the state militia in Florida. Spain was fighting against the American colonists for land in Florida. The Spanish started arming the Gullah and providing them with military training. The Gullah used this military equipment and training to defend their own free, independent black towns. The first black town in North America was called Garcia Real de Santa Teresa de Mose. It was built by the black man and officially recognized later by the Spanish Lieutenant General Montillano in 1738. This black town was a place that slaves could escape to have their own land and receive military training. 1814, Andrew Jackson defeated the Native American Creek Confederation. He imposed on them the Treaty of Fort Jackson, which basically stole their land. So Chief Sakafoka led thousands of his warriors to Florida and joined forces with the mighty Gullah Nation. The so-called Indian Wars were actually the Gullah Wars. General Thomas Jessup said, "Throughout my operations, I found the Negroes the most active and determined warriors, and during the conferences with the Indian chief, I ascertained that they exercised an almost controlling influence over them. This, you may be assured, is a Negro and not an Indian war." 1816, the Battle of Negro Fort. Negro Fort was a structure built by the British and occupied and led by black Gullahs. Andrew Jackson ordered Colonel Clinch to destroy Negro Fort. After they destroyed Negro Fort, Andrew Jackson ordered the torture of the leaders and the enslavement of the black captives. This was a historical turning point in Gullah military strategy. The Gullah leaders who escaped decided that they would never again use the British strategy of fighting from a fixed fortified position. They decided instead that they would return to using the traditional Gullah method of guerrilla warfare, which involved striking and vanishing, luring the enemy into strange areas. The forest, the pasture, the swamp. They had the advantage with decentralized warfare because they knew the land better. As more and more slaves fled south for freedom, thousands of U.S. soldiers died at the hands of the superior Gullah warriors. 1818, the Battle of Suwanee. A stretch of towns along the Suwanee River was occupied by a series of self-sufficient Native American and Gullah colonies. Once again, General Andrew Jackson came to terrorize and invade them. The Gullah and the Native American warriors, allied in the swamps, inflicted heavy damage on the invading army. Andrew Jackson was defeated by the Gullahs, however, he fraudulently claimed the battle as a victory. After the Gullah warriors and their allies disappeared into the swamps, Andrew Jackson exacted revenge against them by slaughtering a nearby settlement of their women and children. The killing of women and children was the only victory Andrew Jackson achieved in the Battle of Suwanee. This Black history was actively hidden. Whenever the word Black or Negro or African were mentioned in war reports, the words were simply omitted or replaced with an asterisk. The Gullah Wars were also hidden from the newspapers so they wouldn't scare away potential European settlers. Real American history shows that the Black man was destroying the institution of slavery. 1822. The resistance had grown completely out of control of the United States government. In Charleston, South Carolina, almost all the slaves in the area had joined a movement to carry out a massive slave revolt. What white people had not considered is that every time you capture a free Gullah warrior and sell him into slavery, the Gullah warrior will only spread his own knowledge amongst the new slaves he's living with. This rebellion was to be led by Denmark Vesey and his lieutenant Peter Poyas. 9,000 slaves were planning to revolt that day. However, the revolt never actually took place because cowardly Black people involved with the movement informed the white colonists of these plans. Everyone involved ended up being executed or sold away to another plantation. 1835, the victory over the King Fort Relief, otherwise known as the Dade Massacre. The reason it was recorded as a massacre instead of a battle was to hide the fact that it was a legitimate military victory for the Black Gullah. Also in 1835, the U.S. Army suffered another defeat at the Withlacoochee River, forcing General Gaines to leave Florida. 1837, Colonel Taylor claimed the Battle of Lake Okeechobee as a victory for the United States. In reality, the Gullah warriors and the Native Americans had already started fleeing the area and spreading the Gullah resistance to other parts of America. The real war that ended slavery was not the Civil War, it was the Gullah Wars. It was Native Americans and Black Muslim Gullahs against the white Christian colonists. The so-called Civil War was carried out for elitist banking and business interests, and it also served as a formality, a ceremonial ending to chattel slavery. In reality, slavery ended in America because it couldn't be maintained against the constant guerrilla attacks, and the only way to stop those attacks was to make slavery illegal. The free Black man would not tolerate slavery. Therefore, it came to an end.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, another hidden war that we actually won, but it been hidden, and they made sure they hid this in history. And there are books about the Gullah War, and you might have heard of the Gullah Geechee, still off of the coast of South Carolina. They still exist, the offspring, and these wars really happened. These rebellions happened all the time. What you don't realize is our ancestors never stop fighting. They never stop fighting, ladies and gentlemen. It's just struck out of history so that you don't know that they never took their foot off of the necks of those Caucasoids down in the South. Never, not for one moment. Please leave your comment and subscribe. And if you can, donate to this channel. Peace, family.